Yo, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Cookie Cutters. In today's episode, we are going to be taking apart a KA24de. So today we're going to be taking a little break from the S12 build, and we're going to be taking this thing apart because it is something that I've been needing to do for a while now, and I just haven't had time to get around to it. But yeah, we're going to give you some tips on pulling a motor apart, if you're going to be taking it to the machine shop, what you should do, what you shouldn't do, what you should take off, what you shouldn't take off, and yeah, hopefully you guys enjoy it. Alrighty, so a little bit of history on this thing and why it's here. Originally I bought this motor off of OfferUp, I believe, and I got it for $100. The guy that was selling it, he had a S13 and he was just using this as a parts motor. So right off the bat, I'm a little bit skeptical. I'm not really expecting much out of this, and yeah, the reason for it is because this is going to go into my sister's 89 S13 coupe. And so yeah, I mean, there's already a motor in it, but it just needs work, and I figured I'd just get a core and then rebuild it, and then when I'm ready, I'll just pull it and then drop this one in. So yeah, let's take a little bit of a walk around on this so we can start giving you guys tips and pointers and all that stuff. So right off the bat, we can see that all of the accessories have already been pulled off. I mean, this thing has been sitting for about a year now. I mean, before I even picked it up, it was already sitting outside in this guy's driveway for a while. And yeah, it's been exposed to, you know, the rain, the heat and humidity and all that stuff. So like I mentioned, all of the accessories are already off. So the first thing you'd want to do is to see if all of the bolts are there. So here we can already see that I'm missing the alternator bracket bolts on the front cover. This thing is really dirty. Let's see, exhaust side, these bolts are already backed out. The distributor is missing, obviously. Alrighty, off to the intake side. There's a bolt missing right there. On the intake side, everything looks okay except for one thing. If you can see that, if it'll focus. There is a bolt broken into the head, so that'll be dealt with when it hits the shop and when we're getting ready to machine it all. Other than that, I mean, everything else looks pretty good. I don't know, based off of the lighting, you can see that the gasket was leaking right here, and there's a bunch of rust spots here. The freeze plugs on this side, they look pretty good. Everything's straight on this side. Back to the exhaust side, what I did notice was that this freeze plug right here was leaking while it was running. You can see all the rust spots that traveled down the block. So yeah, those need to definitely be changed out. Yeah, other than that, based off of just looking at it, just noticed that about 3 bolts are missing. Nothing too crazy. Some motors come into the shop missing like half the front cover bolts. So yeah, looks good so far. So one thing on this motor that really is bothering me is all of the spark plugs that are still in it. I'm not sure if you can see in there, but aside from the rust, it looks like there's silicone in there. So these spark plugs are going to be really hard to take out. And yeah, we've had Hondas come in, Honda heads, with the wires completely cut because they couldn't pull out the plug wires because they filled it with silicone. I guess they were having problems with them coming loose. And that's one thing that you should never do. Please never put silicone around your spark plug wire cables. If you're going to take anything apart, the very first thing that you should always do is drain the fluids. If you're already here and the motor's already out, before you even pull the motor out of the car, that should be the very first thing that you do. You drain all the coolant, drain all the oil. But, you know, there are people that have delivered motors to us, you know, for, you know, full rebuild, and there's 4 or 5 quarts of oil still in the pan, and half the block is full of coolant, and it's just like, come on. You know, if you're gonna pull the motor, drain all of the fluids. Oh yeah. See, this thing had water and oil, and it's just gross. This thing looks like a bad, like, I don't even know what to call it. It looks horrible. But again, this is just from it sitting. Water gets into it, it collects in the oil pan, and you end up with this crap. It's gross. So here it is. This was what was left over in the pan. I mean, it's not much. Like I said, for it being sitting for about a year, it's pretty normal for it to collect water. There's always going to be oil in the crankcase. I mean, you can't get rid of it all, so it's all good. Alrighty. So while that's draining, we're going to move on to the valve cover. So with the valve cover, these are all 10mm bolts. This is an S13 KA because it has 1, 2, 3. And oh wow. Yeah, I believe the bolts are, they look like a 6mm, no 8mm. These are 8mm. And I believe for the S14 they beefed them up because these tend to strip out a lot, which this one feels like it's stripped out already. So for these, instead of using the impact, I'm going to just take them off with the ratchet just because I'm being cautious. I don't want to strip them out, even though these feel like they're really stripped out. I mean, like I said, I don't have much hopes for this engine because it was sitting out for a very long time. Yeah, this thing is stripped out. It's like walking up. Alrighty, yeah, these things are gonna need mad inserts. So yeah, we'll take this off and we'll take a look at the cams. And here we go. Bam. There's the gasket. You can see all the sludge on the inside. It doesn't look like it was running poorly. It's just, you know, looks good. So, but yeah, like I mentioned, there's at least 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Let me get this off. 7. It looks like there's 7 bolts that are stripped out. So yeah, like I said, it's a very common problem with KAs. These tend to strip out very regularly. So yeah, these are all going to need inserts, and that'll happen when, you know, the head's at the shop and we're ready to do final machining on it. So for now, let's not worry about any of that. So the first thing that we see when we pull the valve cover off is obviously the cams, all the lifters, the valvetrain, all that stuff. And it looks like he did the what is it, the guide delete, the upper timing chain guide delete, which, I mean, it is a service bulletin from Nissan, so I mean, that's not really uncommon to see. There's no scarring on any of the cams. Come on, focus. See, there's no scarring. I mean, there is a little bit of light surface rust just because it's been sitting for such a long time. So yeah, see, like this one, surface rusted. So yeah, aside from these bolts being stripped out, I don't know if you could see them. All these, like this one's stripped out, this one's stripped out. All 3 on top are stripped out. I believe this one's stripped out. Yeah, it's still not a complete write-off yet. It's not a waste of $100. So let's see. I mean, it turns nice. Still has compression. So yeah, I don't feel any play back and forth. Oh yeah, there is totally play back and forth. Yeah, there could be rod knock on this thing. I believe there is rod knock in this thing. So still, again, even if it has rod knock, still not a complete write-off, as that can be fixed by taking the crank to the grinder. But we're not gonna find out until we keep going on this thing. So on to the next part. So for the next step, we have to flip the motor over and remove the pan, because if not, we're not gonna get the cams off, we're not gonna get the front gear off. Want to keep the drain pan under it so that you don't make a complete mess. This one, I'll just use the impact just to remove them. So, first major screw up that I see here with the oil pan, as I was taking the bolts off. Look at that. See if it focuses. Come on, focus. So anyways, that's a standard bolt, and all of these are 6mm, so either it's cross-threaded in there or they retapped it for, looks like a 1/4-20. Definitely 1/4-20. I can just tell by looking at the threads. And obviously the head, I mean, it's a Home Depot bolt, so yeah. Alrighty, let's remove the pan. This thing basically popped up. This thing is beat up. Like, obviously the car was low, it was slammed. They were probably drifting it. This thing just came right off. Aside from the water from being out in the elements, I mean, let's check it out. So upon first glance, I mean, everything seems to be alright. I mean, there's just sludge, you know, from water mixing with the oil, from it being outside. Yeah. Shit. Let's see. Plenty enough, there's enough play side to side. You can hear that little, it's probably like a little click. Just checking to see which one is the one that has the rod knock, and it doesn't seem like they do. There's just a lot of chain play, maybe. I don't know, I guess we'll figure it out pretty soon, won't we? But yeah, oil pickup looks good. It's just all the sludge is normal, especially on a high mileage motor. Doesn't appear that any of the oil squirters are broken. Those are very brittle on KAs, and they tend to snap just by looking at them. I've broken probably like 3 on the KA that's in the S12 right now. While I was building it, yeah, I barely touched them and they snapped. Just shit cast aluminum, and yeah. Alrighty, well, these bearings feel pretty good. They feel pretty solid. There's no rust, obviously. You know, the oil will shield the crank from rust. Yeah, let's move on. Alrighty, so since we're already here, we might as well remove the dipstick. So you pull the dipstick out. Simple as that. You'll find a chisel that's about the same diameter, and you just tap it out. Lightly tap it. You don't want to mushroom the dipstick tube. And if it mushrooms, it's okay. You can always deburr it. Boom. See, and like I said, you know, it'll mushroom a little bit, but it's not anything that's gonna damage it. You know, you can still put the dipstick back in. See, works just like normal. So if it gets deburred, I mean, if it gets mushroomed too much, then yeah, you can just always deburr it. Alrighty, so the reason we pulled the oil pan off first after the valve cover was because we need to take off the cams, and the bolts that are holding the gears to the cams are on there very, very tight. So in order for us to have enough leverage on them, we need to stick a wedge somewhere in between the crank and the girdle or the block. So I'm using a piece of scrap tubing that I used for the motor mount video that I did, and we're just gonna drop it in there just like that. Just something for it to hold against. And this is also going to come in handy when it comes to taking off the front pulley. So you try to turn it, it'll be wedged. Alrighty, so with that tube wedged between the crank and the block, we're going to first remove the front pulley. Now I already broke it loose, but as you can see, it helps. That's it. Comes right off. We're gonna do this just because, I mean, might as well pull apart both timing covers just to inspect, just to see if it is, you know, just a chain slop that's causing all the play in the pulley here, or if it's actually rod knock. So that's off. We'll just use some pry bars. And there we have it. I think it's off. Yep, it's off. Boom. The sealing area, there's usually a groove worn in. It's funny because, you know, a piece of rubber actually wears a groove into metal. I mean, especially if you're not using the right oil, or if the oil's burnt, you know, broken down. But yeah, this actually looks pretty good. There's no groove in there that I can feel. So let's continue. Alrighty, so we're gonna start off with the upper cover because this one sits on top of the head gasket. The head gasket comes all the way out to the front here. So these bolts are already loose. They were already backed out. I mean, when I first even got the motor, so they kind of did the work for me. I just gotta finish backing them out. So we'll take them all off. Gotta make sure you get the ones that are in the back of the top cover because there are bolts that are hidden back here. I believe those are it. Let's see, let's double check. I mean, like we already mentioned, there was one missing here and there was one missing up here also. So just keep that in mind, because if you're going to be rebuilding it yourself, you don't want to be going crazy being like, where the hell are these bolts? I mean, it happens at work all the time, you know. A motor will come in and somebody else will take it apart, and when it finally reaches me, you know, I'm missing like 10 different bolts, and I'm just wondering like, where the hell are they? You know, nobody took pictures of it, nobody took notes that, oh yeah, there's bolts missing. So just remember, you know, that there's bolts missing if there are bolts missing. If there aren't bolts missing, then, you know, in order to organize everything, you can separate them out in Ziploc bags and all that stuff. But I mean, since I do this daily, I really don't need to, you know, take the time to separate everything in Ziploc bags. So yeah, anyways, let's continue. Boom. Look at all that chain slop. Look at that. You know, a lot of people say that, you know, timing chains are better, but dude, that's at least 3 degrees of timing right there. The tensioner is, it's oil pressure tensioner, so I mean, it's not really doing anything right now. You can see the bottom chain moving when this one gets pushed down. But yeah, look at that. That is ridiculous amount of chain slop. Alrighty, let's continue. Let's take off the bottom cover. Bottom cover time. You want to make sure that you go around the entire front cover just to make sure all the bolts are off before you try to pry them off. Because if you try to pry it off with the bolts still in there, you're going to have a tough time. I just want to mention that the oil pan has to come off before the front cover even tries to come off, because there's bolts that go into the front cover, so it's all tied in together. So if you try to pull off the front cover before the oil pan, or before the top cover, then yeah, you're gonna be struggling a lot. So just to show you guys, see, the oil pan is bolted into the front cover, but since the oil pump is also part of the front cover, the oil pickup tube is bolted into the front cover, which is also bolted to the girdle that holds the crank in. So if you try to pull the front cover off without removing the oil pan or the oil pickup, yeah, you're not going to get anywhere. You'll probably just damage your oil pickup just by bending it. You'll probably bend it here. So yeah, let's take that off. So now that we're here, everything is off of the front timing cover, we can remove it. So we're just going to take a pry bar and we're going to pop it off. Now I did leave a bolt in right here. I don't know if you can see it. No, you can't see it. I left the bolt in just so that it didn't fall, because Nissan doesn't use gaskets. They use RTV, which is, I don't know, it's whatever, if it works, it works, I guess. But here we go. Ah, see, I forgot a bolt on the top. There we go. It's hiding from me. Okay. Front timing cover. It's normal just to see all this black stuff. It's all burned oil, Depending on how many miles this engine had, which, I mean, it looked like it had quite a bit. But yeah. It looks pretty normal for a used engine. Here in a bit, we'll take apart the oil pump and just to make sure if it didn't have any oiling problems, if there's any scarring with the gear. I mean, it feels like it's spinning smoothly. You can spin it with one hand, or one hand. You can spin it with one finger, so it doesn't feel like it was binding or anything. I mean, there could still be scarring, but based off of seeing no metal shavings in the oil pan when I removed it, I really doubt this thing had rod knock. So yeah. Cool, so we have the entire timing system exposed, and what I like about this is that the front cover isn't holding the chain in or the tensioner in like a BMW would, because I work on a lot of like M10s, BMW M10, S14 M10s, which is basically, or S14s, which is basically an M10 dual cam head. And the front cover, when it goes in, if this tensioner is on the other side, then it'll bind the chain, and it's just a whole freaking mess. So, but yeah, like I mentioned, see, Nissan doesn't use gaskets. They use RTV silicone, and it tends to leak a lot, but it is what it is, I see Nissan as the Ford of imports, and I'm pretty sure a lot of other people do too, but that's just my opinion, Sorry, I mean, I am a Nissan person. But look at that. I still can't get over this. That's so much play in the chain. And this one, it doesn't seem like there's a lot of play, but I mean, the tensioner is not too far out. It's not too far gone, so but yeah, let's start removing some of this stuff. We're gonna get underway with removing the upper timing chain components so that we can be clear to remove the head and see what's inside the chambers. So yeah, just remember that we still have the tube stuck wedged between the crank and the block, so it'll help us get leverage so that this thing just doesn't keep spinning and spinning and spinning, since we don't have a flywheel. And I don't like putting bolts in the back of the crank, because if they shear, then you got bolts in the crank now, and that's a pain in the ass. So I like putting a wedge between the crank and the block, and it makes things easier. So here we go. That one came off. That one came off. Boom. Now I am using a 15/16. That one, this socket just fits perfectly over these bolts, and I mean, these things are massive. I forget how much torque they are, but I know that they're torqued ridiculously for it to be cams. I mean, almost every cam has a ridiculous amount of torque for the gear. So unless it's like a 4-bolt BMW that uses 6mm or 8mm bolts, which is really weird. But yeah, both these are off. And now we're gonna move on to the one that everybody hates taking off, which is this baby right here. Now, the reason why everybody hates taking this one off is because the threads strip out on the head. So let's just hope that it doesn't strip out, because that would be one less headache for me to do, one less headache for me to deal with this damn engine. So let's just get to it. With this one, you want to do it gently, because it is going into aluminum and it's not going into steel or iron. And it feels like it came loose pretty good. There's only one way to find out, is when we completely pull it out. Alrighty, let's just pop these off real quick. Boom. The cams went out of time. It's totally cool, especially when you're taking it apart. Alright, that one's off, this one's off, and since we're rebuilding it, you don't need to mark the timing at all. We'll let the tensioner pop out. There we have it. Now let's remove the tensioner. Should have done that first, but oh well. It's coming off, it's coming off. A lot of people like to delete this one. Chain guide, I don't know why. I've seen one come in deleted, and the front cover had chain grooves worn into it. So from what I know, the service bulletin from Nissan just suggests to remove the top one, because yeah, there's a lot of chain slap noise that happens, or the OEM ones, they tend to break. So when that breaks, all the plastic goes into your timing components and it just messes everything up. So from what I know, just remove the top one and you should be fine. Unless it's like a metal one, like aftermarket chain guides are actually made out of metal, as opposed to the OEM being made out of plastic. Like this one, you can see that it's made out of plastic. Here, I'll take this one off too, just to show you guys. Ah! Oh no, actually this one's made out of metal. You can see that it's metallic. Yeah, so this one's good actually. But if it's made out of plastic, remove it. We are going to start off by removing the tensioner, because yeah, I messed up and I didn't remove it on the top one first, so let's do that. Boom. And then the chain guides are next. There's one guide. which, I mean, if you can see the grooves that are here, it's actually, it's not even that bad. I mean, you could totally reuse this one, actually, to be honest. You don't even have to buy a brand new one. Some of them are just thrashed. Like, there's just mean grooves cut into them. But this one actually looks pretty alright. It's just dirty, but a little bit. There's nothing that a hot tank can't fix, you know? And I dropped the bolt. Alrighty. That's one. And there's the second one. That's really all there is to it. And let's remove the chain. So this collar should slide right off. Where is it? But it doesn't. So we'll just use a crowbar, a pry bar. I mean, it is worn out. Naturally, it wears out in one spot on both sides. So yeah, I mean, it's fine, totally reusable. And timing sprocket. Since we've marked it up with the chisel, this thing's gonna need some persuading as well. And there we have it. Should be off. Come on. Boom. You always want to check the wear on the teeth just to make sure there was no problems with the chain or with the gears or any of that. Which this one seems like it was perfectly fine. So yeah, pretty good stuff. It's just dirty. None of the teeth are broken off. So it's good. Alrighty, so back to the top. We're gonna remove this one. This is the main one. This is the most pain in the ass one, like I said, because it strips. This one's idle. All it does is it transfers the crank timing to the cams with the big gear. So I mean, could Nissan have, you know, designed it better? Yes, they could have, but it is what it is, you know. So here we go. And the chain doesn't come out because there's really not enough room to come out, so the whole gear has to come off in order to remove the chain. Alrighty. Judging by the threads, it looks like it's fine. I don't know, it's not focusing. Focus! Right here, yeah. Everything looks fine. We'll pull this off and we'll inspect it. Let's pull the chain off first. So the bolt looked fine. Let's look at this. It's just a shaft with it's like a bronze bushing, kind of like a wrist pin bushing. It's just a big piece of bronze, copper, bronze, copper, bronze, bronze, copper, bronze, copper, copper, bronze. And everything looks fine. There's no scoring in it. Everything looks fine. Gear wear, there's really no gear wear at all. Looks like this engine was properly lubed up. This is the distributor drive. And there's no teeth missing, there's no wear marks. Everything looks fine so far. Alrighty, so since we have removed all of the timing components, now we are able to move on to removing the head. Now, with KAs, especially the S13K, which is this one, Nissan, well, I mean, not just KAs actually, KAs and RBs. I mean, all of the RBs and the KAs have the same cam bolt design. They have the caps, you know, they use the same, actually, it's the same part number for the bolts. Now, these things are very, very weak. If you look at them the wrong way, if you breathe on them the wrong way, if you touch them the wrong way, they'll either snap and break into the head, or they'll strip out the threads. So when it comes to removing these, you got to be very, very aware of what you're doing, because if not, it's going to be more work for the machine shop or for yourself, especially if you're going to be trying to remove it yourself. You know, the broken bolt, if you're going to try to remove the broken bolt yourself, then yeah, it's a lot of problems. It's a lot of headaches. So there's really no like set way of removing the cams, especially like this when the cams are already out of time and there's really no orientation to them right now. The way I do it, especially, you know, with any motor that I mess with, the one that has the valves open, which on the exhaust side it looks like it's going to be cylinder number 3, and on the intake it looks like cylinder number 1. These two have the most upward force right now, so there's going to be the most tension on them. So if I remove, you know, these here, there's going to be a lot of upward force here, so it won't really bend the cam. But if I remove this one first, it'll want to bend the cam up and it'll snap it, or you have the possibility of breaking bolts in the head. So I like to remove them evenly, and I like to, you know, just be aware of where the cam is, as far as, you know, if it starts tilting or rocking, you know, then I will, you know, loosen the one that has the least amount of tension on it, so that it doesn't bend and it doesn't have the ability to even crack. So we're gonna start off with removing, let's say, cylinder number 2, because it's on the base circle, so there's no load on this one right now. So I'll loosen it about half a turn, then I'll do the next one, which is number 1, because it has very little tension on it. So we'll remove this one next, about a quarter turn, that's about it. And then number 4, and we'll just keep going at it slowly. You want to, if you don't know what you're doing, honestly at this point you should just leave it alone, especially with the KA. So let's just keep going. I'm doing it by feel. I can feel the bolt, see if they break or if they, you know, snap. So now that they're all loose, oh, except for this one, and the back. Boom. See, they're all loose, none of them snapped. Alrighty, now I'm going to back off the one that has the least amount of load. I'm going to back it off about 4 or 5 turns. Boom. Next I'm going to do number 4, since this one has no tension on it also. Boom. See, the cam isn't trying to push up here, it's trying to push up here. The cam isn't trying to push up here, so I'm able to remove these with the least amount of headache. Now, depending on where, you know, if you're removing cams and, you know, you're trying to do this job, say you're trying to replace head bolts, it's like this one has tension because the bolts don't spin by hand. See, like this one spins by hand, this one spins by hand, this one spins by hand, even the ones in the back spin by hand. So these 2 lobes, these 4 lobes actually have the most amount of tension right now, so those are the ones you want to really be worried about. So I'll loosen this one about half a turn, and I'll move to this one half a turn. And I'll check these, make sure that they're still loose, there's no tension on them. And again, half a turn, half a turn, half turn, half turn. Alrighty. Still, see, caps come off. Perfect. And again, half turn, half turn, Still doesn't spin by hand, so we'll keep going. Half turn, half turn. So you're basically equalizing the load between the lobes so that the cam doesn't flex at all. Because any amount of flex on a cam, if you bend a cam, you have the possibility of breaking it, or just bending it, and when you try to put it back in, it won't spin. We'll just keep doing half turns, half turns, half turns. So now this one spins by hand, this one spins by hand. This one's almost there. Half turn, and there we go. Cam's out. It's free. See, all the caps are loose. No issues. Zero issues. Bolts didn't snap. Cams didn't snap. Cams didn't bend. Or the cam didn't bend, should I say, since we still haven't done the intake side. So now we'll just pull these off. And the caps are numbered. They're numbered and they're marked which direction they go, because you don't want to mix that up either. If you mix it up, there's a whole headache just to try to put them back in the right order, you know. So if they're not marked, like the Nissan, see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and they have I for intake and E for exhaust. If they're not marked, then you should punch them or scribe them. You know, so you say 1, just number them from front to back, 1 through 6. So that's another thing. Alrighty, this one's fighting me a little bit. Might be a bit of dirt in the threads, but yeah. See the design of them? See if it'll focus. 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 So the design of these bolts, see how it's beefy up until it gets to here, and then it's just really, really, really thin here. So they tend to snap about here, and they get stuck in the head. I mean, these have a torque spec of, I believe, 7 pounds, 7 or 8 pounds, and that's kind of a lot considering the design of this bolt. So honestly, on the S12, that's the one thing in the engine that I still have not torqued down, because I'm going to buy a set of ARP. ARP sells a set for RB26 and RB25, and like I said, they're the same exact bolt as a KA, except you're only going to use the ones that don't have the stud towers for the valve cover, I believe. So yeah, just a FYI, a little bit of info there, you know. Alrighty, so let's take these off. I'm gonna back them all out. At this point, the cam is free. So we'll remove it, and then we'll move on to the intake cam. Boom, boom. Boom. And there we go, it's free. While we're here, we'll look at the cam journals. See, there's a bit of scoring on them. It's nothing too ridiculous though, I've seen worse. Nothing a quick micro polish won't fix. Focus. So yeah, this cam actually looks pretty good. Lobes are looking good, so we'll leave it here. Next, intake cam. Again, we're going to look at which lobes have the most amount of upward pressure, which it looks like it's going to be 1 and 2. So we're going to leave those alone for now. We're going to break these loose. And we'll break loose the one in the front just for now. Now, one thing that just caught my eye, this bolt right here. It is not this. It's not an OEM cam bolt, so this might have a repair in it. We'll find out soon enough. Now that these are all loose, we're gonna deal with the ones that have the most upward pressure. So like I said, break it, quarter turn. Break it loose, quarter turn. Break it loose, quarter turn. Break it loose, quarter turn. And we just go back and forth. Quarter turn, quarter turn, quarter turn. Like these. Oh yeah, this feels like a thread repair, or like an attempt at a thread repair. It is not smooth at all. I hope it's not a cross thread. You know, it's just one of those, if it's torqued, or if it's cross threaded, tight is tight, right? I hope that's not the case with this one right here. So yeah, these are all free now. So you can turn them by hand. Turn them by hand. I'm going to back them out as much as possible. Because remember, there's no force on these. So these aren't causing the cam to bend up. If I loosen these first, the cam would bend up and it would snap right down the middle right here. So these have the most upward pressure because of the valve springs. So we're going to mess with these last. Half turn, half turn, half turn, half turn, half turn. We'll just keep going at it. This is the wonky one. It's already all the way up. This one's all the way up. And we'll just focus on these. So you still can't turn these by hand. So half turn them until basically loosen them evenly so that the pressure relieves equally and it doesn't bend the cam. Now if you're going with the aftermarket cam, and who cares if you snap them, right? Well, possibility of damaging the head also, so you always want to be careful when removing cams because they could potentially be very expensive depending on, you know, what brand, the duration, lift, profile, overlap. And here we have it. They're up and out. Again, no snapped bolts, no stripped threads, at least that I can feel. Maybe on this one, but no stripped threads so far. Alrighty. Remove the caps, just like the exhaust side, and we'll set them aside. Alrighty, so now that the cam caps are completely off, you want to remember which one's the intake and which one's the exhaust cam, because with KAs there's like 4 different variations of, I believe, exhaust cam, and people tend to put the exhaust cams on the intake side, and there's a whole, you know, it's a whole Frankenstein list of, you know, different stock OEM cams that you can run just to bump your power up from stock. So if you're just gonna do a stock rebuild like what this is gonna be, then you want to make sure that you look at which one's the exhaust and which one's the intake. So for this one, the green is the intake and the red orangish is the exhaust. So we'll keep that in the back of our head just for when it comes time to put everything back together. So yeah, we'll remove the cams. Boom, boom. We'll set them off to the side. All right. The cams are out. And from what I can see is on the exhaust side, especially on this one, I don't know if you can see it on the screen, but there's a fat groove worn in all the way around the journal. Now, it's not really a big issue, All we gotta do is just break off the rough edges that are in here. And I mean, it has enough support to function properly. So we'll address that once, you know, it comes time to machine the head. Now we're gonna move on with the head studs, because with the KA you have to remove the cams in order to access the head studs, which are down here. But we're gonna go even a step further, and the KA has solid lifters. It's a shim over bucket, and you want to make sure that you don't lose the order of them, especially if it's going to be a stock rebuild, because then when it comes time to do the valve adjustment, you're going to be all over the place, you know, trying to figure out which, you know, lifter goes in which hole, it goes with which valve, and it ends up being a lot of work, especially when doing the valve job with the valves out of the head. You got to go back and forth between the valve grinder and back to the head, you know, with your feeler gauges, and making sure that the valve adjustment is solid. So if you're here, you want to number them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 all the way to the back, just so that you don't lose the order. Make sure you know which one's the exhaust side, which one's the intake side, and yeah, just a little tip. So let's take these out. So you're just gonna take a magnet and we're gonna pop them up. Boom, there's number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 'There we go. Okay, so for that one, as an example, it came out, but we're gonna use it as an example. Say it's being stubborn, doesn't want to come out, right? So what do? What you're gonna do is you're gonna grab either a ball peen hammer, which has, you know, a ball at the end of, you know, the back, and or you could grab a chisel, right? And all you want to do is with the blunt side, you just tap it and it pops right back up. The spring pressure from the impact, it'll push the lifter back out and it'll free it up. So say this one was giving us problems, right? You just dull end and then you just give it a light tap. And see, I don't know if you saw that, but it popped the lifter right up. And then at that point, you can just grab it with the magnet and it'll come right out. So that's just a little tip if you're pulling motors apart, if you're pulling an engine apart, you know. Alrighty, so my camera shut off and it didn't record me removing the head studs, so, or should I say the head bolts. But basically what I explained was that there are many ways to skin a cat. You know, a lot of people like to, you know, have their specific order of loosening bolts. For me, what I do is I just work center, go out, 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 and yeah, head bolts are already out. These use a 10mm Allen, which kind of sucks. So you never want to use an impact, especially like an air impact, because you have the possibility of stripping, you know, the head, and then it just creates a world of headaches because there's no room in here to get an extractor out. And on top of that, depending if there's, you know, whoever assembled it before, if they didn't lube the threads, it could be seized in there. So if you hit it with an impact, you'll just snap the bolt and you'll break a head bolt into the block. And again, that's another pain in the ass. So yeah. And another thing that I was mentioning in the deleted footage was that head washers. These things are always found in heads that are brought to us at the shop. And you know, it's not just, you know, everyday people. You know, we deal with all of the dealerships around us. So a lot of Kia, a lot of Honda, a lot of Toyota, Chevy, Buick, And those guys are supposed to be, you know, ASC certified master techs, you know, so when they do an R&R for a cylinder head, dude, they forget these and they leave them in there. So they bring them to us, and obviously the first thing that we check is to make sure that they didn't leave these in there. And but sometimes, you know, we don't check because, you know, we assume that, you know, they're master techs, you know, it's a dealership. They should have already pulled these out. So we'll throw them in the wash. We'll throw the head in the wash, and we'll do the job and everything. You know, we'll ship it out, and then we'll get a call probably a couple days later, and they're like, "Hey, man, you know, we're missing the head bolt washers for, you know, the cylinder head. We took it to you guys, and, you know, we can't find it on our end, so it has to be, you know, at your shop." And so we got to go and we dive into the parts washer and we pull these out. So yeah, triple check, quadruple check, make sure that all of your head bolt washers are completely out of the head before you remove the head. So that's just a little rant and a little tip at the same time. So yeah, cool. Now, time to remove the head. Let's see what these cylinders have in store for us. So as you can see here, black pistons. I mean, obviously, you know, there's a lot of heat, a lot of oil gets in here. Depending on the condition of the piston rings, blow by, you know. But yeah, this looks like it was healthy, very healthy. This doesn't look abnormal at all. There's a bit of whitening on the exhaust side, but, you know, it's normal. This is actually what pistons are supposed to look like when you remove them out of a engine that has 100,000+ miles on it. So this looks totally normal. Everything looks perfect. Let's take a look at the head, yeah? So here we have the head. Exhaust valves, intake valves, it's all switched now because I flipped the head over, but yeah. The exhaust valves were getting kind of hot. They were, except for these. These 3 cylinders, it looks like they were probably leaning out, so could just be a design flaw, could be normal, but yeah, everything looks good so far. I mean, the intake valves are fine, nothing looks like it's bent. Aside from that, you know, whitening on the spark plugs, they're not covered in oil, so like there's no visible cracks in the head. So yeah, everything looks normal. So let's move on to the block. Before we remove the crank, rods, pistons, and all that, in order for the crank to come out, you need to remove the rear main seal housing. And yeah, you want to do this first before you even put it on an engine stand, because see, I can't get anything in there. I can't get, you know, ratchets in there with sockets. I can't do any of that. So just gonna need a box wrench and a lot of time. So it's very tedious. So the very first thing that you remove on an engine should be the rear main seal, especially if you're gonna be putting it on an engine stand. So just a little pro tip, you know, that I mess up all the time. Okay, last bolt. Whew. Let's use this one. This one might work. Here we go. All right. And there we go. See, it's such a headache just for the rear main seal, especially if it's on a stand. So pro tip, take it off first. Again, take it off first. Alrighty, so with the rear main seal removed, we can now move on to pulling the crank out of the block. So a lot of people like to remove the rods and pistons first. Me personally, I like to remove all of the mains and then loosen all of the rod caps, because then the crank will be easily to remove. You don't have to stick any extensions or any bolts down in there to try to push the pistons out. And if you do that, there's a possibility of scarring up, the crank pins, and you'll have problems later with, scarring of the bearings when you start putting everything back together, especially if it's not micro polished. So me personally, after doing a lot of these and after, messing up a couple, I like to just remove the mains, remove the rod caps, and then pull the crank out with the pistons and rods still in the block. And yeah, it gives you all the room in the world to just push the pistons out. No worries. You don't have to worry about messing up the crank. So that's just how I like to do it. Like I said, there's many ways to do it. A lot of people like doing one thing first and then the other, and then, but that's just how I do it on a daily basis. So it works, it works. And again, just like the head bolt removal, I work from center out. I'll loosen the center two first, and then I'll start working my way out until I loosen them all up. Cool. So, little pro tip also. Where is it? I like putting back the front bolt, the front pulley bolt, just so you can spin the motor over and, access the other rods. So I'll put this on. Oh shit, wrong one. Wrong size, wrong size. It's this one. Yeah. Leave that on there. So since the number 2 and number 3 rods are facing us, we'll remove those first. Ah! Now once you remove these, you want to leave the nuts all the way to the top, especially if they're studs, the stud type. If they're not bolt type, then like ARP status. So in order to break these loose and start the process of getting these out, you'll take a hammer and just tap them. Then they'll go straight down. So yeah, once you're there, remove them. Just remove the caps. And you want to keep these in order also, because each rod cap goes with a different rod. And if you mix them up, then they don't line up, and then when you machine them, wow, these actually look really good. No rod knock here. This looks like just normal wear. Looks like the oil was a bit dirty, but nothing too serious, so these are actually pretty good so far. So you want to remember, number 2, number 3, put them off to the side, and spin the crank over. Carefully, obviously. So now those are at the bottom, and now 1 and 4 are at the top, and we'll loosen those next. So with these loose, same thing as the first two that we did. You're gonna leave the nuts all the way up. You're basically covering the rod bolt because you don't want to mushroom that out. If you mushroom it out, then you'll have problems with the threads later on when you're trying to machine them or trying to put them back together. So you want to avoid that as much as possible. So we'll leave the nuts up like that and gently tap. So it doesn't need anything too ridiculous. You don't have to, you know, so just tap. Boom. Remove the nuts. There you go, see? Threads are nice and saved, they're not mushroomed. And there we go. We'll take these off. Well, if it falls in, then you know, at least you know where it went. 1 and 4. The bearing doesn't want to come out, but shit. Right. And let's see. Same thing, number 1, number 4, normal wear. No rod knock, no nothing, so I guess I lucked out. I thought at the beginning of this video that this thing was gonna have rod knock from all that play in the front pulley, but I guess it was just really worn out and stretched timing chains. So yeah, no rod knock, that's good. So like I said, keep these in order. 1, 4, you can put 2 and 3 on the bench. Boom. Now you're gonna want to leave it like this, right? Mains are already loosened. Boom. What we gotta do now is take them out. We use the Makita for that. More convenient. Same thing, you don't want to impact them out. I mean, even though it is cast iron, you still don't want to impact them out. So we'll take a pry bar, put it all the way through, give it some hits. Let's do this one right here. Now you don't want to do it on the crank pins because you don't want to damage them. And there we go. It's free. So we'll pull the bolts out. With the KA, there's 2 of them that are a little bit longer because of the way the girdle is set up. Well, there's actually 1 that's longer. 3 that's longer. So there we go. Let's take the girdle out and see what we have here. Whoa, alright. So it looks like number 2 here has a groove. It's not a very deep groove, but it's still a groove nonetheless. That's on the bearing. So it looks like the bearing took the grunt of the damage. One thing that you really want to make sure is good on a crank is the thrust. If the thrust is worn out, or if the thrust is completely spun, then at that point the crank could potentially be garbage. It'd just be a big boat anchor, or it could still be saved depending on how much money you want to put into it. If it's a KA, you know, you just go out and buy another crank. But this one, it looks like it's normal wear on the flywheel side because when you press the clutch in, the clutch pedal, it loads the crank up towards the front of the engine, so that's why this side has the exposed bottom layer. But it's nothing out of the ordinary. This side, you see, it's nice and still has its coating from the factory. So yeah, let's actually check out what kind of bearings these are. See if they're aftermarket. See if this thing's ever been rebuilt. Nope, these are OEM bearings. Nissan, standard size. So we got lucky with this one. I mean, $100, you know? $100, no rod knock. Main bearings didn't spin. Everything looks good. All right. So at this point, like I said, you don't have to press nothing in between the crank pins or nothing, because easy. Wiggle it out. Boom. See that? No damaged crank pins, no worry about hitting the pins with, you know, a screwdriver or a hammer or any of that trying to get the pistons out. This thing is out. There's really no damage to the crank. Everything looks good. It'll get a micro polish and it'll go back in. This thing is solid. So we'll put that off to the side. Alrighty, so with the crank out, cradles out, now we can focus on getting the pistons and rod out. So pistons and rods out. So hopefully you kept everything in order. This is the main. And yeah, you just put them right back on. Make sure the tangs line up. This one's on its way out, so I'm gonna catch it. I'm just gonna catch it. Boom, see? Out. Put that on. And we'll thread the nuts back on. Now, a lot of people, they flip out on the order of the pistons, you know. Well, should I say the order of the rods? It doesn't really matter, especially when they're going to get resized. They're going to get resized to stock OEM spec, so it doesn't matter if number 1 goes into number 3 when you're putting it back together, or if number 3 goes into number 2, 4 goes into 1. It doesn't matter. As long as you got your rods remachined, they're going to all be the same size. You know, it really doesn't matter. A lot of people flip out, like I said, but it's not really anything to worry about. Now, what you do want to look at sometimes is the tang orientation. So the top of the piston, it'll have a notch or a punch mark, and that'll signify front of the motor. So if you're looking at this from the top, it'll be sitting like this with the punch mark towards the front, and you'll see that the tangs are on, it looks like the intake side. So it'll be punch forward, tangs facing you, especially if you're going this way, you know. That's usually how I memorize it. So, and there's also a specific orientation, because like this one has, it looks like a squirter for the cylinder wall. So the pressure will be built up in here and it'll be squirting oil up into the cylinder wall. So that's another reason why you want to pay attention to orientation for the connecting rod and for the piston. Some of them have grooves cut in, depending on what engine it is, for valve recesses. So if you put them in backwards, then you'll bend valves and you'll mess up really expensive parts. So that's another thing to look out for when you're removing pistons and rods. So you want to keep the orientation. Like I said, order doesn't matter. The real important part, orientation. That's my whole spiel on connecting rods, because yeah, let's continue. And when you're pushing these out, remember, you want to be careful with the oil squirters, because this is a KA, so if you breathe on them the wrong way, they'll just snap in half. This is the one that fell in earlier, so we'll just put it up on, we'll just put it back on. Now I'm not going to remove the oil squirters because, like I said, you breathe on them the wrong way, they break. And I'll do that when I'm at the shop, especially because I don't have a 12.10 millimeter here at home. So yeah, I'll take those off when I'm at the shop, and then right before it goes into the wash. So set this piston to the side, and there we have it. We'll just remove all of the main bearings. Now that we know that, you know, all the bearings are good, crank is good, looks like it's standard, just a micro polish, and then we'll put a fresh set of bearings when it's time to put it back together. So yeah. Now for the thrust bearing, I use a hammer. I use the handle side of a hammer since it's soft. This one's rubber. And I'll tap the opposite side of the tang a couple times until it spins out. And that's how you remove thrust bearings without damaging the block, without damaging the bearing. And yeah, same thing with this one. See, the crank side has the most wear, and the front pulley side has the least amount of wear. So yeah, looks like everything's healthy here. So I guess I got lucky. Like I said again, I got lucky with this thing, paying $100. I was really skeptical at first, so there we have it. The block is completely torn apart. All that's left to do is check the cylinder walls just to make sure that there's nothing funky going on with those. But you know, pulling the pistons out and looking at them, let's see. See, the rings are free moving with the exception of the number 2s. The number 2s are rusted shut. Oh, well, that was easy to move. Like I said, this thing was out in the elements, so the rings are definitely seized, but we're gonna check the cylinder walls for any scoring, for any binding, any scratches, any abnormal wear. The piston skirts look healthy. There's gonna be, you know, vertical scratch marks. That's just normal stuffs. Yeah, nothing wrong here. Based off of just looking at all the pistons real quick, real quick, looks like the block is gonna be perfectly fine. Looking at the block, there's still crosshatch in here. And I mean, yeah. Of course there's gonna be a groove at the top because that's where the compression or the combustion's happening, should I say. I mean, there is rust rings, but like I said, it was just from sitting out in the rain, out in the elements. But see, the thrust side, everything's fine. There's still crosshatch. That means it's probably still stock bore size because I mean the bearings are OEM, so this thing is stock bore size. Still has crosshatch. There's no lips on the top of the cylinder wall, which means that there is no abnormal wear. The vertical marks, those are normal. Like I said, it's just from a piston slap. So yeah, everything looks a-okay with this thing. And we are done taking this thing apart. So yeah, like I mentioned earlier or several times throughout this video, that, you know, I'm actually really thankful that this engine worked out. You know, I thought it was gonna have rod knock at first, you know, or, you know, I thought parts were gonna be missing. And I mean, you know, visual inspections, everything looks good. You know, hopefully I can take this to the shop and, you know, look at it more in depth, pull the head completely apart, pull the valves out, pull the springs out, the retainers, and pressure check it, see if the head casting is good, and if it is, then cool. And then the block, I mean, the block looks perfectly fine. I don't think it's going to be cracked at all. There's no implications, or there's nothing telling me that, you know, oh, something's wrong with this, you know. So I mean, like I said, for $100 I got really lucky. The bearings all look good, the piston rings look good, the cylinder walls look good. The deck surface, can't really see it because the gasket's still on there a little bit. So yeah, but just to recap, this is an S13KA. It's gonna be going into my sister's S13 coupe. It's an 89 and it's white. I'm not gonna show it because I've had a lot of people come by my house already asking me if I was gonna sell it. It's totally bone stock. It has a working HUD, and yeah, it's perfect. There's no body damage. It's all one color, and that's pretty rare for a coupe, you know. I mean, well, S13 period. So yeah, but you know, got lucky with this one. So, you know, hopefully I'm able to make another video, you know, showing the processes that goes into machining, cleaning, and reassembling this whole engine. So for now, I think we're done. It's my dad's birthday today, so I gotta get ready to shower. I gotta get ready, you know, just to, we're gonna go out for dinner. So yeah, if you guys enjoyed this video, leave a thumbs up. If you guys got any questions or comments, or if you know you're a YouTube certified machinist that, you know, disagrees with some of the stuff that I did today, hey man, I'm waiting for you, because you know, I've seen a lot of those comments and a lot of the engine machining you know, videos on YouTube, so I'm not going to be surprised by it. So yeah, but other than that, if you guys enjoyed it, if you guys want to see more of it, subscribe, follow all of the social medias, and hope to see you guys soon. So yeah, catch you guys in the next one. Peace.